there are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that.
In hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death.
How accurate are those nursing home numbers? Are residents who test positive and die at hospitals being counted as COVID cases, or are they nursing home deaths? Can you explain that part?
I'm going to ask Dr. Ezike.
I think we covered that. So the numbers that we have on our board in terms of cases are laboratory confirmed cases. And as the governor explained, there are situations in which there's a laboratory confirmed case in the nursing home, and if the suite mate or roommate, if you will, develops similar symptoms, they wouldn't necessarily need a test because it would be deemed, by normal outbreak definition that person has COVID as well. And so that would come under a COVID case, a presumed COVID case in our outbreak status, but there would never have been a laboratory confirmation.
Because we still have to remember that there's 67,000 people that have succumbed to this virus in just 6 to 7 weeks. So when people compare it to flu, flu may have some level of mortality, but it's over weeks and months, not over 6 or 7 weeks. Flu may have some level of mortality, but it's over weeks and months, not over 6 or 7 weeks.
What do you think the single most important thing we need to be doing right now as Americans and as a country is?
Well, the very first thing is the social isolation, so that the number of contacts outside your household is minimized. And washing your hands, distancing as much as possible. It'll help everyone get out of this more quickly and reduce the deaths and reduce the economic reduction if we implement these strong isolation measures on a countrywide basis.
Are you aware that there are people out there who have these conspiracy theories that this was all created by you in order to inoculate everyone in the world and put a chip into their blood so you can track them?
Yeah, that's very strange.
Yes.
That the organization that's about saving lives and warning, gets attacked as though we were somehow connected to it.
Well, if you don't save our lives, you can't control our brains.
And then the final solution, which is a year to 2 years off, is the vaccine. So we've got to go full speed ahead on all three fronts.
Just to head off the conspiracy theorists, maybe we shouldn't call the vaccine the final solution. Maybe just the best solution.
Yeah, the return to normal solution.
When was the last time you became angry?
I didn't come up. I was talking about how there's been more polio cases than we hoped for this last year. And
I'll bet they didn't
how mad that made me.
Yes. That wasn't on the top of their list.
How mad that made me. Yes. That wasn't on the top.
And it became something that we get to do together. We're partners in crime.
First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. And how you get a vaccine that making 7 billion of those is going to be an incredible challenge. the vaccine is the thing that will change things. And that's why, really figuring out how do we make sure it's safe, because that when you give it to 7 billion healthy people, that's super important. No, the awareness of this is a threat, and probably the biggest threat to kill tens of millions of people. That will be permanently embedded. And I think about pandemics a lot, and even so, I can hardly believe we're in this situation.
Mm-hmm. It is. And every day it's different, isn't it?
And yeah, and we need to orchestrate the numbers, the science, the innovation, and we need to do it very, very quickly. Well, there's no doubt, having paid many trillions of dollars, more than we might have had to if we'd been properly ready, people will this time, because it affected the rich countries. This is the biggest event that people will experience in their entire lives. We will have standby diagnostics. We will have deep antiviral libraries. We will have antibody scale-up. We will have vaccine platforms. We will have early warning systems. We will do germ games. The cost of doing all those things well is very small compared to what we're going through here. And so now people realize, okay, there really is a meaningful probability every 20 years or so, with lots of world travel, that one of these will come along. Well, I feel very confident that this time we won't ignore the potential for the next epidemic.
The threat of a second wave is very real, and it's one that I hope we are unanimous in, that none of us wants to see that happen. In the 1918 flu, or the pandemic that is playing out right now around the globe, there are case studies abound that those who resume life as it was, who drop all of the social distancing and the masking, can go right back into a second wave. And that wave can be as deadly or worse than the first. We have to continue to move incrementally and measure our data every step of the way. That means continuing to ramp up our testing and our tracing capabilities. And the sixth phase, which is the ultimate goal, is post-pandemic, and that is when community spread is not expected to return. That's going to be a while. We just have to be very clear about that. Post-pandemic is when we have a vaccine. So today I've signed an executive order to extend the Safer at Home order until May 28th.
Michigan has also recently learned that FEMA will be committing enough swabs and transport media for 15,000 tests per day during the month of May. When those supplies arrive, they will enable us to broadly test at-risk populations and support other testing efforts in the community. So case investigation and contact tracing are also critical parts of our effort to contain this virus that may occur across the state. So once a person has tested positive for COVID-19, contact tracing is actually the process where we identify those individuals who have been in contact with that person and quarantining them as necessary.
Like Dr. Fauci said in his testimony yesterday, reopening too quickly will trigger another outbreak that we can't control.
Basic measures like social distancing, wearing masks, and washing our hands really has to remain a part of our lives as we move forward.
Of course, reopening the real estate industry does not mean business as usual. It's important for all realtors and our clients to understand the requirements under the executive orders. For those unfamiliar with the real estate requirements under the executive order, the following must be adhered to. All in-person meetings with clients and customers must be done by appointment. There can be no more than 4 people on a property at any one time. In-person open houses are not allowed. Individuals must maintain 6 feet social distance at all times. In-person showings of rental units are not permitted until after the current tenant vacates the property.
Do you want to see MSP hand out tickets tomorrow for people not social distancing and not wearing masks?
I think the Michigan State Police is monitoring all of the conversations around this event tomorrow, that they are prepared and are working with the Attorney General. I think we've seen some joint statements today, and I believe that if there is a reason to issue a ticket, that they're prepared to do that. I'm hopeful that they don't have reason to.
even before you know something works. At risk, you have to start producing it, because once you know it works, you can't say, great, it works. Now, give me another 6 months to produce it. So we're working with a variety of companies to take that risk. We didn't take it with Zika. That's why, we have a nice Zika vaccine, but we don't have enough to do it because there's no Zika around. Same with SARS. So that's one of the things we're really going to push on, is to be able to have it ready if, in fact, it works. Now, the issue of safety, something that I want to make sure the American public understand. It's not only safety when you inject somebody and they get maybe an idiosyncratic reaction, they get a little allergic reaction, they get pain. There's safety associated. Does the vaccine make you worse? And there are diseases in which you vaccinate someone, they get infected with what you're trying to protect them with, and you actually enhance the infection. Is that when you talk about, will this virus just disappear? And as I've said publicly many times, that is just not going to happen, because it's such a highly transmissible virus. And even if we get better control over the summer months, it is likely that there will be virus somewhere on this planet that will eventually get back to us. So my approach towards the possibility of a rebound and a second wave in the fall is that A, it's entirely conceivable and possible that it would happen, but B, I would hope that between now and then, given the capability of doing the testing that you've heard from Admiral Giroir, and the ability of us to stock up on personal protective equipment, and the workforce that the CDC under Dr. Redfield will be putting forth to be able to identify, isolate, and contact trace, I hope that if we do have the threat of a second wave, we will be able to deal with it very effectively to prevent it from becoming an outbreak, not only worse than now, but much, much less.
Phase 1. Again, you have to go through those gating criteria related to 14 days of decreasing evidence of illness and decreasing testing despite adequate testing. So phase 1 begins with all vulnerable individuals, including those with comorbidities, continuing to shelter in place, and ensuring that those that first go out into the public are not those that are most vulnerable to bad outcomes in this disease. And then ensuring that we continue to do 6 feet maximum physical distancing in public spaces, continuing to avoid large gatherings, and all non-essential travel. For the employers, next slide. Again, if a vulnerable population needs to return to work and cannot be teleworking, there should be special accommodations for all vulnerable populations, as well as options for teleworking. We believe every employee should encourage work return in phases, from 20% or 25% to 40% to 50%. And again, minimize all non-essential travel. Phase 1 continued. Next slide. If the schools are already closed, they should remain closed. All visits to senior living facilities and hospitals should continue to be prohibited. Large venues, including sit-down dining, can only be operated under strict physical distancing protocols and maintaining those 6 feet. Gyms could open if they, again, could adhere to strict physical distancing, and elective surgeries can resume on an outpatient basis. Phase 2. Next slide. Next slide. Again, you have to go through the criteria again of a continuation of another 14-day decline among those criteria that were in the gating. Again, we're asking for all vulnerable individuals shelter in place. We did not put a timeline on any of the phases. We want the governors, with the data that they have, community by community, to be setting up those timelines. Again, we're asking for the public to continue to maximize physical distance. However, we increased social settings to be able to now have 50 individuals, and non-essential travel can resume. Next slide. This is for the employers. We still would like to encourage telework, and the common areas should remain closed or be physically distanced. All non-essential travel for employees can resume. And then again, special accommodations for vulnerable. Next slide. This should be a relief to many of households that have small children. Schools, daycares, and camps can reopen in phase 2. Visits to senior living facilities, however, should remain in hospitals prohibited. Large venues can operate, but solely under moderate physical distancing, and elective surgeries can resume on an outpatient and inpatient basis. Phase 3. And so phase 3, I won't go through in detail, is essentially returning to our new normal with all of what we talked about through all phases, continuing the good hygiene practices, continuing the respect for spaces between individuals, because we know that we still have an issue with asymptomatic spread. I do believe with this plan that we're both confronting the issue of finding symptomatic individuals through our networks with early alert, as well as those who come and present to different hospitals and emergency room with testing and contact tracing, but critically have put in place what we believe is a safety net through asymptomatic sentinel surveillance that is centered around our most vulnerable groups between nursing homes and our Native American people and indigenous populations, and our inner city groups that we know may be in multi-generational households and of unique risk.
Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread a disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you? No right not to be vaccinated, meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. If the vaccination
Where is that in the Constitution?
How you do it, my thoughts are, because it's not written into law, it's just a very dominant culture. I think the only way you can do it is a couple ways. One, I'm thinking about an executive order from day one that says, in more legalese than this is not a thing. We will no longer honor this, because the way that aldermanic prerogative works is there's got to be compliance with the executive branch, because otherwise it doesn't work. So you got to eliminate that compliance, and you make it a mandate, and then you do training, particularly in the city, I'll call them licensing departments, whether it's zoning, buildings, housing will be impacted by it, planning certainly, and you pick the people to run those agencies and the deputies that are pledging allegiance to the new world order and good governance, and then I think you have the inspector general do some spot audits to make sure that there is real compliance.
It's going to arbitration.
Well, look, I think it's going to be, we're going to make a deal. We always make a deal, but it's going to be a different kind of deal, because it's got to be a deal that respects the values in the new world order regarding local policing.
Governor, I was really struck by the fact that you've described the protests as some of the worst racism and awful parts of our history. And you even said that there were swastikas, Confederate flags, and nooses present. On a recent call, you asked Vice President Pence if he could discourage the protesters. Do you think you will get his support? And given Trump's tweets to liberate Michigan, make a deal with protesters, do you feel the administration is helping fuel the fire here?
Well, I do think that the fact of the matter is these protests, in a perverse way, make it likelier that we're going to have to stay in a stay-home posture. Michigan Capitol is one of the few capitals in the country where people can come with bearing arms. And what we saw last week and what we anticipate seeing tomorrow is those arms being used to intimidate others, to being brandished in a way that is to strike fear into others. And that is not legal activity.
Governor, it's Megan. Maybe it's the opinion of politicians that these protesters are just violent racists, but the Michigan State Legislature has actually filed a lawsuit against you, claiming that your state of emergency extension to May 28th is unlawful. Since they did not approve it, are you acting beyond your authority here? And do you understand why there are so many concerned citizens about government overreach at this point?
Of course. And you know what? I think that that is a robust debate that we should absolutely have.
Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer called abortion procedures life-sustaining during a recent interview. That is this week's Speak Out segment. Governor Whitmer was interviewed on the Axe Files podcast last week, a podcast hosted by David Axelrod, who is a former President Barack Obama advisor. In the interview, Whitmer said the argument that abortion is an elective procedure is, quote, ridiculous. Take a listen to what else Whitmer had to say.
You know, a woman's health care, her whole future, her ability to decide if and when she starts a family is not an election. It is a fundamental to her life. It is life-sustaining.
Life-sustaining. The governor called abortion life-sustaining.
When we go through some of the governor's orders that are more controversial, you're allowed to fish in a canoe, but not from your motorboat, for example. Is that something that your sheriffs and water officers would enforce or not?
In our area, we would take it on a case-by-case basis. The governor does. It is an order the governor has that you can fish from a canoe or a kayak, but not in a 25-horse motored, 16-foot deep V fishing boat.
Does that make sense to you as the sheriff?
You know, it really doesn't to me. Okay. I mean, if I have my boat at a dock, but it's got a motor on it, I can't go 100 feet out into my pond and fish, but I can get in a canoe in 46-degree water that just potentially tips over. So
say a prayer for some of these local officials that have to make some really tough decisions. Talked to the mayor of Point Pleasant Beach today, Paul Canitra. He was on the Daily Briefing talking about how they're going to reopen beaches. You know, it's not going to be easy to tell people if they're in a line that they're going to have to wear a mask while they're at the beach.